Hi, this is Luis Souza from rawveganpower.com, and I'm very excited to have here today a guest with a very interesting topic. Do you ever thought that raw foods could help you flying? You know, I didn't know that. That's the reason I'm bringing this guest, very cool guest to you today. Welcome, Christopher Babayode from NoJetStress.com.
Hello, Luis. It's great to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
You know, you really surprised me with your product because I have never thought about that. That people could have problems, health problems, flying, taking airplanes and so on. And you mentioned that your product has other aspects, other elements, but the raw foods would be one of them. So before we go to this topic, I'd like to know you better, and our audience would like to know you better. So tell us how you got in touch with the raw vegan diet, and have you been always raw vegan? I can't believe it, but anyway, tell me your story, please, Christopher.
Okay, well, I haven't always been into the raw vegan. I got into it through a very interesting book by the name of Conscious Eating, written by Dr. Gabriel Cousens. Dr. Gabriel Cousens runs a retreat in Tucson, Arizona now, and it was one of the first books around that I knew of that had valid information that you could use to improve your life through eating and a lifestyle, and introduce the various elements that actually come back to relate to the specifics of how to use a raw food diet in the context of staying healthy while flying. So at the time, there wasn't much else around. It was only after reading and digesting Dr. Gabriel Cousens' book that I came across the book written by David Wolfe. And very slowly, I began to modify my diet. I also, at the time, took up a nutritional therapy course, which was actually taught by the Thames Valley University in the United Kingdom, and I qualified as a nutritional therapist. That was my basic foundation and my understanding of nutritional therapy, and it was from what you might call a naturopathic perspective. And that philosophy in itself is something that is very holistic. It's quite varied, but at the same time, it's quite specific. And that led me to the idea of biogenic raw food, food that has life energy in it. And it's from that point of view that I really understood the value and the power of raw food as such. And as a human being, just like everyone else, I've trialed different diets and come to a point where I began to realize that this makes the most sense. I started seeing changes in my own health and how I felt and how it made me feel while flying. And I also began to see the potential it had specifically as a tool, as a therapeutic tool for my clients that I work with when I'm flying. So over a period of about 15 years or so, I've modified my diet, and I do 100% raw some of the time. Sometimes I'm percentage, maybe 80, and I keep myself in balance between those two ends as I progress. And when I'm working with clients specifically, sometimes it's ideal for them to go 100% to get a specific result, and sometimes I mix it up between percentages just to point them in the right direction and help them along.
And when you mention your clients, you are coaching them nutritionally?
Yes, I am. I'm a nutritional therapist. I've been practicing since 2003. I've been flying for British Airways as an airline steward for the past 15 years. And British Airways has a cabin crew and pilot community of up to 15,000 staff members. We travel long and short haul routes all over the world. And as you can imagine, it can be quite a hectic lifestyle. And the challenges are in the nature of the job. So you do get people who are flying, crew and pilots, who struggle with their weight, who have problems that relate to hormones that basically are part and parcel of the job that they need to deal with, and other health situations that spring from the life of flying so frequently that nutritional therapy and my approach actually help specifically deal with. So yes, I take one-on-one clients and we work through their certain particular circumstances from a naturopathic perspective, which is my training. And then on top of that, I add in the layers of what I understand from the raw food perspective, what works in the field, and what people can actually go away and do. And I make that point because there is a great difference. And I say that specifically because we have lots of theories about what works. And it's one thing to have a raw food kitchen at your disposal and be able to make the meals that you require with your dehydrator, your spiralizer, all these lovely tools. But then it's another thing to be able to take that lifestyle on the road and make it work for you in the far-flung areas of the world where you might not necessarily have those tools. So there's part science to it and there's part art to it, and I like to help people bridge that gap so they can get the best results possible.
You know, I was hearing you and I was thinking, one of the main concerns that people have, and I think I have, you know, most of us have, when going raw is what should you do when you are traveling. But we are here talking about people who are always traveling, right, as a work. And yeah, I can see that it's difficult. And one day you are here, and the other day you are in the other side of the planet. It's crazy. What are your advices? Share with us something that you say to your clients, because I think it's so interesting.
Well, it's a very interesting question. It's a very interesting question. And there are several things that you can actually do as someone who flies regularly. One of the most obvious things to do, which might be underrated, but which is quite powerful, I think, is something that I picked up and I understood from, believe it or not, the Vietnam War.
Oh,
it's a funny.
that's interesting.
It's a bit out of the ordinary, but my understanding is that one of the problems with the US effort in the Vietnam War is, one, they had to ship all their equipment over to Vietnam to fight in the jungles, and they had to log it with them all the way through the jungle, and it became troublesome. And what they found was that the Viet Cong that they were fighting, they had a different attitude. Even though they knew the perils of the war, the perils of the jungle as an unknown quantity to a certain extent, what they did is what we now know as guerrilla warfare, which is you go along, and if you come across an enemy that you've defeated, you don't have you don't have anything with you, but you use all the things that you can pick up from the enemy and you move on. And in that respect, when it comes to being raw on the road, you have to maximize what you can do when you get to your destination. So it might mean a bit of preparation beforehand. So you find out what is local to where you're going, and you establish as a priority being able to get hold of the things that you need, either from the hotel or from the local area, like a juice bar or a supermarket that has fruit and veg, or these kind of things. You try and find that out beforehand, so you always have something to do, or a point place that you can go to. And from there, you might find one or two people who know the area. You can then ask them and find out more. That's one thing to do. Also, and this is particularly tricky at this time because of the restrictions that we have with the flying environment and the terrorist threat. You don't really have the luxury of bringing so much water or so much food on board an aircraft. But personally, what I always do, and I fly an average of 10,000 miles a week, week in, week out, a week, 10,000 miles a week. What I do is that I always have some dry food. Maybe it might be goji berries, it might be dry fruits. If I'm doing dry fruit, it might be seaweed. I have those that I pack always with me, and then I make a salad that I always have. So what my intention is that I have food to last me from where I am to where I'm going, at least, without a shadow of doubt, and then I improvise thereafter. So I've seen people like Fully Raw Christina, who's a lovely personality.
Oh, yeah.
And she shows you what she does. She actually brings lots of food with her, fresh fruit and stuff with her. But that's within the mainland United States, and that's fairly easy to do, and it's a good thing to do when you can do that and bring fruit with you and things like that. But if you're coming into the US, you don't have that option because you're not allowed to bring fresh fruit.
That's right.
So dried fruit, some of it's acceptable as long as it's bad. If anything, they're afraid of the threat of you bringing in insects that then go onto the crops and then start causing havoc. So dried fruit, processed, not necessarily processed in the sense of processing, but chopped up fruit, dried fruit is good. Seaweeds, cereals, grains. If you use a holistic or healthy supplement powder of some description, you can use those because they are very easy. And the one thing that I found particularly invaluable is the use of a mobile blender. And I take that with me on every trip. I take that with me on every trip. A mobile blender. You can get the two types. You can get the NutriBullets. Not that I'm not plugging NutriBullet because I don't, but they are quite handy. Or you can get the they're like 200 to 300 watt, sort of like
I see.
Type. Yes.
I see.
And with a decent sized drinking beaker or water bottle, you can put your water in there, put your supplements in there, put your protein powder in there, blend it up, and you've got a drink. So those are the kinds of things that I would recommend, because if you stress over it, it then can sometimes defeat being able to get something decent without putting yourself into a panic. So I like to go the guerrilla way. I go to my station.
I love that.
And I find things in that respect.
The other day I was reading a blog, and I don't remember where, but the advice was to fast during the flights,
That's a very interesting point, and it is actually for someone who is who's a passenger on an aircraft. To a certain extent, that does work particularly well. So it is actually a valid tool. However, for the likes of myself and my 13 to 15,000 colleagues working, we are expending energy all the time.
Yeah,
so in that respect, it's not practical for us to fast because we need the energy. So when we talk more specifically about raw vegan food in respect to flying, I'll talk about some of the recommendations that can help someone who needs to eat in that respect on a flight. Because yes, fasting is good if you're immobile and you're sitting down, which is not necessarily a good idea anyway, but if you're a passenger, you can afford that luxury. But as someone who's working and expending energy, it's not always the right thing for them to do.
From other point of view, I was in the US the other day, a month ago, more or less, and are used to know about the obesity problem in the US. But it's all over the world, right? But in the US, we talk more about that. It's common knowledge. But one thing that I was impressed during the flight I took, it was with, I think it was United Airlines. It was because the people who were serving, they are becoming obese. We can see that, you know. And there's not so much space for obesity there, right? And then I was thinking, well, if they go this way, they won't be able to work anymore.
Very true.
Is this happening with your colleagues as well?
To a certain extent, yes. And the problem is it's endemic. It's throughout world's populations, but specifically for people who fly, there is a lot of hormone-related adjusting when you fly so often. And hormones run so many of the different activities that happen and mechanisms in the body. And one of the hormones that hormones themselves actually work in concert together. They all work together, and they use the bloodstream as a biofeedback mechanism. So what that means is, if one hormone or a couple of hormones are in the bloodstream, it would be a signal for the other hormones to reduce their appearance in the bloodstream. So they all affect each other in that respect. So one of the hormones that relates specifically to weight gain is insulin.
Oh.
And insulin, when there's lots of sugar in the blood, if it's excessive, then insulin's more than likely to adopt it and help it become stored as fat in the body. Now, that's one of the aspects of what's going on, but because frequent flyers constantly have to adjust to the amount of daylight that they're exposed to when they fly, if they're going east, they're getting less daylight because the days are shorter. If they're going west, they're getting more daylight because the day is longer. So this different type of daylight exposure actually affects one of the major hormones called melatonin. And melatonin in many respects is a super antioxidant, and it is also one of the master hormones that interacts with the other hormones. So you can see that if people are flying quite often and they're going east to west and back and their body's adjusting, the synchronicity of how these hormones should react can get out of balance. And when it does so, this can contribute to weight gain for people who fly often. And invariably, that becomes an underlying problem that frequent flyers and people who fly often have to deal with. So yes, it can be worked at and remedied, but it takes a multiple-pronged approach to do so. So yes, it is a problem, it can be dealt with, but it's an underlying problem because of the lifestyle.
I see. And actually, it's not only with them, it's happening all over, right? Yeah. Well, and while you were speaking, you mentioned insulin. And isn't there a lot of adrenaline as well? I mean, when you are flying so often, aren't you so stressed that you have lots of adrenaline as well? If you can't handle that situation.
A great observation. Yes, there is a lot of cortisol, which is known majorly for its function as a stress hormone. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are also hormones that are that are actually in greater supply as well, that can actually interfere and distort the way the biochemistry of the body works. But in essence, you can work with them as opposed to have them be your worst enemy. You can work with them to make things better. There are supplements, there are foods that can actually help you even out the different hormones that come into the bloodstream and cause problems for flyers. Flying is an unnatural effect. As some people used to say, if God meant us to fly, he would give us wings. And he clearly hasn't done that. So in that respect, it is unnatural. In fact, I came across in some research I was doing, I came across some research by the Californian Institute of Health Science, which basically says that the body checks for its reference to the Earth every 90 seconds.
Oh.
Now, if you imagine the fact that you're on an aircraft for 9 hours, 10 hours, you know, it is a stressful situation in terms of the biochemistry of the body. And these kinds of things can participate, the excess cortisol, the more adrenaline, you know, all these hormones that are used in a flight or fight syndrome, because the body can perceive it as being stressful. I mean, all you have to do as a flyer is look out the window and there's a disconnect there, because you know you're going so fast, but everything looks like it's so slow. So in a sense, these are the feedbacks that the body is getting. It is quite unnatural, and they do cause hormones to overreact. But again, when you take tools that are healthy and support you in a natural way, you're easily able to actually deal with that and bring everything back into balance. And it's really important as a frequent flyer, if you want to remain healthy, to do that.
You know, it's interesting because for most people, flying is the, or maybe traveling is the most pleasurable thing, you know, traveling. But flying is the stress part of the travel, the trip, right? And usually, well, that's my routine, you know, if I want to get some adrenaline, or I go play some sport, or I watch a movie, right? And most movies are violent, are, you know, with things that really pump up all those hormones, right? But for most people, we don't go to war, right? We don't really get into all that violence, right? But I think the most stressful situation that most people live is flying, right? As we are talking here.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's a statistic on my website that basically, I think it was a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal survey that said 45% of people turn up at the airport stressed even before the flight. Okay, you have to negotiate the baggage and check in and all those things as well. But ultimately, flying is stressful because it is unnatural. It is unnatural to the human body.
So, could we say that in an ideal world, all the airlines would serve us raw food?
In an ideal world, and for me, this is a very, very interesting topic, specifically because there is a conversation within the airline business at the moment.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I love that.
But it's one that we need to wage. We need to wage our war, or our point of view, quite vociferously, and take the argument to them. Traditionally, airlines and flying have always had that, what's the word? They've always had that factor about, I don't want to say snobbery, but I want to, there's the class differentiation. You're either flying first class, or you're flying business, or you fly down the back. And this has led to people not necessarily understanding the environment of flying. When you're flying, they serve, or they try to serve, first-class restaurant meals on an aircraft. First-class restaurant meals in business or in first class are not the best kind of food to be consuming at altitude. End of story. This would make the good argument to serve healthy raw food meals, because first and foremost, they're alkalizing.
Right.
Going back to the conversation that we were just having, the fact that they are alkalizing means that they counter all the stress, that all those hormones that are running around in your body because you're flying and because it's unnatural. It counters all of that straight away. That's one great argument for that. Secondly, the environment of flying is acidifying in and of itself. And I say this quite pointedly and specifically because at altitude, the aircraft cabin is pressurized to between the kind of altitude that you would find between 6,000 and 8,000 feet. So it's the kind of environment you can expect to find if you were to go to base camp at Mount Everest. There's less oxygen in the air. The barometric pressure in the air is less, so there is less oxygen molecules in the air. This means that the natural protection that we have by having a dense layer of oxygen at sea level is missing in the air. Now, as you and I know, we breathe oxygen and we use it to combust our food stuff and break it down.
Right.
So oxygen, in a sense, is an antioxidant for us in this respect. When you're at altitude, there is less oxygen, so there's more accumulation of acids. You also have acids from the state and the stress, and on top of that, less oxygen means that more cosmic radiation can come into the aircraft and you're more susceptible. So a raw vegan food diet is quite helpful in the respect that it's naturally quite alkalizing if you do it right. If you do it and you use supplements too, then you're able to bring those alkaline salts, those alkaline minerals and supplements into your body, which are naturally quite protective of all your organs and your body and protective against ionizing radiation that's more available in an aircraft cabin. So this kind of brings us to the nub of the problem or the argument. If we can get more people to understand the value, and instead of getting 4-star Michelin chefs recommending the menu for, you know, for Lufthansa or United or British Airways or whatever, and get them to construct decent, healthy, alkaline meals in the vein of a raw vegan food diet, then we would be doing our bodies a service in the air and a service for long-term health, because ultimately one of the main lines of reasoning about jet lag is that it is an acidifying lifestyle, and we want to counter that. And in a sense, there is no better way to counter that than a raw vegan food diet.
Oh, I loved your answer, and it's so cool because you give detail and good, and so yes, you agree with me, right? And I will be so happy if this happens, you know. And I don't mind because I don't go first class. Then if they bring the raw some fruits, at least some fruits, you know, and more salads, and
Yeah.
you know, I would love an economic class. It will be fantastic. I will be happy with that, and I'm sure that most people will too. Well, I want to end here showing your side here to our audience. You see, no jet stress.
Excellent.
And if you are a flyer or if you want to get less stressed during your flights, you can come here and you will talk to Christopher Babayode. Christopher, now I need to ask you my last question. If you watched my other interviews, you know my last question to my
Oh dear.
It's a big question, short answer, just one sentence. Comparing the person you were before being raw vegan and the person you are now, what would be your raw vegan power?
Oh, a very interesting question. My raw vegan power would be the power of alkalinity.
Oh, succinct. I love that.
The power
The
of
power of
alkalinity.
alkalinity,
Yeah.
which is a huge power, right?
It is so powerful. And I see it in a microcosmic context, you might say, which could be myself, and a macrocosmic context. And when I say that, I mean, if you look at the world and you look at the ecological picture of how we've polluted our seas, our atmosphere, the radio waves, these are all acid influences. And we need to balance those out with the opposite, which is alkalinity, to bring that balance back. So it's happening in me and it's happening in us as a raw vegan community. And that is what we want to take and reflect out to the world at large so we can bring about that balance. And the more alkalinity in the world, the greater balance and the more we can all achieve together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming here today, Christopher.
It's been a
I
pleasure.
really had a lesson here. I learned so much from you, and
We're all learning. It's a pleasure. It's you know, the more knowledge that we can share with each other and move things along, the better for all of us, really.
and I can see that your clients are very lucky to have you as a coach because you really have everything straight and streamlined. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christopher. I really loved talking to you.
Thank
And
you.
and you who are watching, go now to nojetstress.com and take a look at the product Christopher has to offer you. Know more about that and eat more raw vegan food during your flights. It will alkalize you. You will feel less stressed. Okay? Thank you, Christopher. Bye-bye.
Bye bye now. Speak to you soon.